I'm 95 now, and I can feel the edges of things softening. Not just my hands or my voice, but time itself. It doesn't stretch the way it used to. It folds in on itself. Days sit close together, nights come quicker, and there isn't much left between one and the next. I suppose that's why I'm saying this now. Not because I think it will change anything for me. It won't. But maybe it will land somewhere it still matters. I chose comfort over truth. I didn't think of it that way at the time. I don't think anyone ever does. It looked reasonable, sensible even. It looked like stability, like doing the right thing. That's how it begins. I was 26 when I first noticed it. Her name was Layla. She had a way of speaking that didn't rush to fill silence. Most people do that when they're young. They're afraid of the quiet, but she wasn't. She let things sit. We worked in the same office, a narrow place with two ceiling fans that rattled when they turned. It was the kind of place where people stayed longer than they meant to, the kind of place where years could pass without much changing. She sat across from me. At first it was nothing, a few words in the morning, a shared cup of tea in the afternoon, small things. You don't notice when something begins like that. But there was a moment, I remember it clearly, when I realized I was waiting for her to speak. Not listening, waiting. There's a difference. That should have told me something. Instead, I told myself it was harmless. At the time, I was already engaged. My family had arranged it. Her name was Samina. She came from a good family. Everyone said so. She was kind in a quiet, careful way. There was nothing wrong with her. Not one thing I could point to and say, this is why I cannot go through with it. And that was the problem. There was no reason to leave. No obvious one anyway. Layla never asked me to choose. Not directly. She never said anything that would have made it easy. She just continued as she was, sitting across from me, speaking when she had something to say, letting the silence do the rest. One afternoon the power went out. The fans stopped. The room grew still. You could hear the street outside, the vendors calling, a bicycle bell somewhere far off. We didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "You don't look like someone who's about to get married." I laughed. I remember that. A short, dismissive laugh. I said something like, "What does that even look like?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, the way people do when they're waiting for you to hear yourself. "You know," she said finally. I did know, but knowing something and saying it are not the same. Saying it would have changed things. It would have required something from me, a kind of courage I didn't have, or told myself I didn't need. So I shrugged it off. I told her it was all fine, that everything was arranged, that this is how things are done. I said it the way you repeat something you've heard many times before. She nodded, and that was it. No argument, no persuasion, just that quiet acceptance. I think that was the last moment anything could have been different. After that, things moved quickly. The wedding was large. There were too many people to recognize, too many hands to shake. I remember feeling like I was being carried along by something that had already been decided long before I arrived. Samina was kind, like I said. She did everything expected of her. She learned my routines. She adjusted her own. We settled into something that looked like a life, and for a while I believed that was enough. Comfort has a way of doing that. It smooths over the edges. It gives you just enough ease that you stop asking questions. We had children, 2 boys, then a girl. There were school fees, doctor visits, small arguments about money, about time. Ordinary things. The kind of things that fill a life without you noticing the shape it's taking. Years passed. I saw Layla a few more times after the wedding, not often. The office changed. People moved on. But once, maybe 2 years later, I ran into her near the bus stop. She was carrying a bag of groceries. We spoke politely, asked about each other's families. She smiled in the same quiet way. Nothing in her voice suggested regret. Before we parted, she said, "I hope you're happy." It wasn't a question. I said, "Yes," and I meant it, in the way a man means something he hasn't examined too closely. That was the last time I saw her. Or maybe I chose to make it the last. Because after that, I avoided places she might be. I told myself it didn't matter. That whatever that feeling was, it belonged to another time. A time before responsibilities, before children, before everything that now depended on me staying where I was. That's how comfort works. It ties itself to other people, to duty, to expectation. It becomes harder to separate what you want from what you believe you owe. Samina and I built a life, a steady one. The children grew, they did well enough. There were weddings, grandchildren, small celebrations that came and went. Photographs were taken, smiles were held for a moment longer than they felt natural. If you looked at us from the outside, you would have said it was a good life. Maybe it was. But there was a quiet in me that never quite settled. It wasn't loud, it didn't interrupt my days. It just sat there, like something left unfinished. Sometimes it would surface in small ways, a conversation I avoided, a thought I pushed aside, a question I didn't allow myself to follow too far. What would have happened if I had said it out loud? If I had told the truth when it first became clear? I didn't ask that often, not directly, but it was there. Samina never asked either. I think she sensed something in her own way. People do, but she chose her own kind of comfort. She didn't press. She didn't dig into the parts of me that remained closed. We lived alongside each other, not unhappily, but not entirely known either. That's something I understand now. You can spend decades with a person and still keep a part of yourself hidden. Not out of cruelty, just out of habit. Out of fear of what might happen if you bring it into the light. Years became decades. The children moved away. The house grew quieter. Rooms we once used every day began to sit empty. We closed doors we didn't need to open anymore. Samina grew older beside me. There was a time when she fell ill. Not suddenly, it came slowly, a tiredness that didn't go away. Then hospital visits, tests, waiting. I remember sitting beside her bed one evening. The light was low. Machines made soft, regular sounds. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She said, "You've always been a good man." I didn't know what to say to that, because I wasn't sure it was true, not in the way she meant it. I had been reliable. I had stayed. I had provided. But there are other kinds of honesty, the ones that don't show up in actions, but in what you allow yourself to admit. I had failed there. I wanted to tell her something in that moment, not everything. Not even the whole truth. Just enough to close that distance that had always been between us. But I didn't. I said, "You too." And that was all. She died a few weeks later. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything from you. It just settles in and stays. After that, the house felt different. Not just empty, hollow in a way I hadn't expected, as if something had been holding it together that I hadn't noticed until it was gone. I had more time then, too much maybe. Time has a way of changing when you have nothing urgent to fill it with. It stretches again, but not in a way that feels useful. It gives you space to think about things you once kept buried. That's when Layla began to return to me, not as she was exactly, but as a possibility, a version of life that had once been within reach and then quietly set aside. I tried to find her once. It took some effort. Old contacts, distant acquaintances, names that led to other names. Eventually, I found out she had moved years ago. Then later, that she had passed away. There wasn't much detail, just a year, a place, that was all. I remember sitting with that information for a long time, not reacting, not crying, just sitting, because there was nothing to do with it. No conversation left to have, no question to ask, no way to know who she had become, or if she had ever thought of me in the years that followed. That's the part people don't talk about. It's not just the loss of what was, it's the loss of what could have been, and the knowledge that you chose not to find out. That choice doesn't disappear, it stays with you, quiet but persistent. At 95, I don't have many illusions left. I don't tell myself that things would have been perfect if I had chosen differently. They wouldn't have been. Life doesn't work that way. But I do know this. There was a truth I recognized early on, and I turned away from it because it was easier, because it didn't disrupt anything, because it allowed me to continue as expected. And that decision shaped everything that came after. Not in obvious ways, not in ways anyone else would point to and say, this is where it went wrong, but in the small, quiet distance that remained between me and my own life. If you're listening to this, I don't know what you're holding back from. Maybe it's not a person, maybe it's something else, a thought, a realization, something you've noticed but decided not to follow. I won't tell you what to do with it. I don't think it works that way. But I will say this. Comfort is not neutral. It feels safe, but it asks something in return. Slowly, over time. It takes pieces you don't realize you're giving up. And one day, if you live long enough, you might find yourself trying to remember when exactly you started choosing it. I can't pinpoint that moment anymore. It wasn't the wedding. It wasn't even that conversation in the office. It was smaller than that, quieter. A decision not to say one honest thing when it first became clear. That's all it was, and that was enough. There isn't much time left for me now. I can feel that in the way my body moves, in the way my days settle into themselves without much variation. I don't feel afraid of it, just aware. There are names I won't say again, conversations that will remain unfinished, parts of myself that were never fully lived. That's not something I can change, so I sit with it. In the mornings I make my tea. I take it slowly. There's no need to rush anymore. There hasn't been for a long time. Sometimes I think about that office, the sound of the fans, the way the light came in through the windows in the afternoon, and a woman who knew something about me before I was ready to admit it. I wonder what would have happened if I had said it out loud. Not because I expect an answer, just because the question is still there. It will probably stay with me until the end. And that, I think, is what it took from me.